All right. Welcome, everyone, to Holding Complexity. This is still, even though it's the second one, a new series in which we discuss important and often controversial questions related to Jewish LGBTQ youth with nuance and thoughtfulness as our guide. My name is Dr. Jeremy Novich.
I'm Rachael Fried.
I use he, him pronouns. I'm a clinical psychologist and the clinical director at JQI.
I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director at JQI.
And today we will be discussing how to help queer youth envision their Jewish future. So, because you are here live, during tonight's conversation, you're invited to submit questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I always like to point to things when I'm on a camera. I feel like that's the cool thing to do. So I'm just glad to have that opportunity. All right, so let's dive right in. Um, Jewish queer youth envisioning their Jewish future. Why are we talking about this?
So, what a good question. Why are we talking about this? Well, I I think what's really important to note is that it can be really hard for Jewish queer youth, especially those who are brought up in more traditional and more observant settings. It can be really hard to even envision a future at all.
Right.
And not being able to envision a future is it doesn't set you up for success. Let
Yeah,
alone it can lead to very dark times, not being able to envision a future for yourself.
for sure. Um, my thought is one thing is if you grow up in going to either Jewish school or um, or you're raised Orthodox or traditional, it can be um, really important. You get really attached to your community, to your lifestyle, um, and and when you don't fit in and can't see, well, what is my life going to be? That, as you said, is really dark times.
It's not even that you get attached. It's sometimes, I mean, and it sometimes is almost everything you know, right? Like school and shul and camp and after school things, all of that is within this one community. And if you can't envision a future in that community, it's almost like you can't envision any future at all.
Hmm. If I don't know if anybody can hear, but my dog is barking. It is incredibly distracting. Would you mind letting her out? Thank you. Um, this is live, so this kind of
Great.
stuff
I
happens.
mean, I also, do you want to respond to that? Or
No,
I,
go for
I
it.
also think it's a good question we're asking. Why do we need to be talking about in Jewish queer youth envisioning their future? And in some ways, it's a funny question to me because it's sort of is it's almost like the whole point and what I was. There's a dog here visiting us. It's almost like the whole point of everything, right? Like I was raised and my parents paid for day school education and high school and yeshiva seminary, and all of it is sort of to continue the Jewish future. And I know we, as a community, spend millions of dollars on Kiruv every year trying to help bring people in and make them closer to religion and to Judaism. And yet for queer people, it sometimes that it feels like there's an exception there.
Yeah, I remember my dad, when we were growing up, he used to always talk about like, we often talk about like, oh, the shidduch crisis. He would talk about the crisis with the cost of Jewish education. And when I think I was looking at
This.
I was looking at prices a few weeks ago, and it's the equivalent of buying several cars every year per child. So to me, like that's a huge
A
investment
big investment,
in each
definitely.
person. And like what we're just gonna like let people just float away. It's like, why would we do that? It becomes such an important part of yourself. At least for many people, I know for me it was.
I think not only that, but it's like NCSY and any Jewish youth group, any kind of, I think even like Cars for Kids, right? There's um, a lot of investment in trying to bring people closer. And it's sort of, we're paying all this money to bring people closer to helpful want what queer youth that we work with already want. And somehow it can feel like actually the community is pushing them away, or at least like there's not any space or room in the community for that person.
Yeah, to me, this is almost like a no-brainer. It's like, of course, we want to have youth engaged in Judaism. You know, it's actually one of the questions I think you know, Rachel, as well. Whenever I go to like a conference or people, I'm just telling people about about JQY, people say, well, how many of your youth are still from?
Yeah, that's
I
a frequently asked question.
frequently asked question. It drives me a little crazy. It could come from a place of curiosity. I always want to say that. And also sometimes it feels like, well, how many of your youth are still from? Almost like a how much how much should we care, or are they lost causes? And I never say it, but I want to say kind of like, well, how have you engaged with queer youth?
Right.
How have you tried to help them engage in Judaism before you come and ask me when they're coming here for a safe space? How many of them still want to, be involved? And I almost want to ask them the question right back.
Yeah, I've always felt that way. We get a lot of questions also about sort of like reconciling identity and how do you reconcile your Jewishness and queerness, not necessarily in those terms. But my question back is like, I don't know, like I'm telling you that I exist and that I am both a gay person and a Jewish person, and I don't know why that's only on me to reconcile. Like I'm telling you here that I am real and you see me and this is who I am. How do you reconcile it?
Yeah, it's hard to sometimes understand, even though I think I do. Like, where does the question almost come from? It's like, wait, how are you both?
Right.
And it's I don't know. In Jewish day school, we learned a ton of things, like a ton, right? There's lots of rules and lots of ways to be spiritual, and I don't think about like, oh well, it all gets canceled out because I'm gay. Like it's like there's still a ton of things to do, a ton of things I could do, a ton of ways I can engage. And yet I think our youth answer that question. I think that like
Yeah.
is what comes up.
Well, because somehow, even though in again, I want to talk from my perspective personally, and also from the perspective of the youth that we work with at JQI, because we do see hundreds of queer youth every year
Yeah,
who utilize our services, who come through our doors, and so I can't remember what I was about to say, but
that's okay. We'll
it is
probably do
important
this
to
several
tell you
times.
the context that we're here in.
Yes. Well, a lot of them come, and they also, some of them ask the same question, like, how am I gonna? I think what they're more focused on is their family,
Yeah,
like where the rejection comes from. I think I've had people come and say, well, isn't it against the Torah being queer? And then I kind of don't really know what that means. So I'm
yeah.
like, well, what about it is against the Torah? Are not coming here saying, I want to have, I mean, let's just say what it is, right? I mean, everybody is always asking about, they associate queerness with like male anal intercourse.
Yeah.
And that's not what our youth are coming and asking about.
I think it's interesting. People ask like, do you have a rabbi? Do you have what's your, how do you deal with the like religious parts of things? And I think what's fascinating is that really doesn't, it's rarely the first thing to come up. People are, I mean, especially teens are concerned about, are they going to have friends? Is their family going to still love them? Are they going to have a school to go to? Are they going to have a house and a roof to live under? And it's much more about the like human rejection than anything else, which to me makes sense. I think, especially in Orthodoxy, we're a very communal it's a very communal sect, and we are this is something that I love, an idea by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the that like we're a people who we hold the pain and the joy of each other, right? We when somebody passes away, we go to pay a shiva call. When somebody is getting married, we go to the wedding, not just because we're invited, we're supposed to go, but actually there's something even about, even if you're not invited to a wedding, but you think that your presence at the wedding would enhance the simcha at the wedding, you're supposed to go to the wedding.
All
Like
right,
it's
free
like
food.
it's about like I am showing up for you, I'm increasing your joy. And when somebody visits someone who's sick, it is said that that person is taking away 1/60th of the pain of that person. That like that's who we are as Jewish people. And so of course a lot of our conversations are around that. For some reason, people forget that those things are true when somebody is talking about LGBTQ plus identity, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, when I wrote my dissertation a long time ago, I was focused on the experiences. It was about the experiences of gay Jewish men in the Orthodox community, but it was really from like a social communal perspective. Like relationship with God is kind of a smaller piece. And when I say that, I don't mean to say it's not important. What I mean to say is like the conflict. I think that's one piece of the conflict, and I don't know how big of a piece it is, but it's something to recognize.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when people and sort of even this even came up in some of the questions that people asked us ahead of time, that this question of like living a halachic lifestyle, how can you be queer and observant or living halachic lifestyle?
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many different things that question could mean, and it's not obvious to me which meaning there is, which meaning is inherent in that. But one of the questions that I think that could mean is, like you said, about male anal sex, which is a bizarre thing to bring up, in my opinion, when the person who's talking to you didn't bring it up first. But I also, but it applies to some people in the LGBTQIA plus community. It doesn't even apply to the majority. And so there's just this interesting, almost this like dissonance that people have. Like when somebody says LGBTQ, they immediately go to cis gay men having sex. And
yeah,
it's a very strange thing. I can't think of other examples where where there's like a response in a similar way. I also think it inappropriately sexualizes youth. Like
oh
when
yeah,
youth are talking about their identities coming out, how are they going to manage this and this and this? And someone is like pivoting to talk about something that they were like, wait, what?
What do you do about the pasuk? And it's
Yeah.
like we're working with children. They're minors, half of them.
Right.
Like this is not like we're trying to help them feel mentally and emotionally whole. Um, understanding themselves, all of themselves. Um, so it's like it's everybody's fixation, I think, more so than it is queer people's fixation.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to our topic.
Yes.
Because we could talk about this all day,
Right.
but
So those are some of the challenges.
Some challenges. I mean, I'll talk one more challenge from my own personal perspective. So I went to an all girls Orthodox high school, and there is a class in high school in that school called WIJL, which stands for Women in Jewish Law. And happy International Women's Day / month to everyone while we're on the topic.
Yay.
And it's kind of like, this is a class for seniors to take. You wait the whole high school, all your high school years to come to this point, and you get to take WIJL, and it's like all the things that no one was talking about till now, and all the secrets that Jewish women get to hold and have, which is and then you get to class and it's about like kisoi rosh, like covering your hair after marriage, and going to the mikvah, and a lot about like periods and menstrual cycles. I have to say, it definitely seemed more exciting before getting to the class, but it's this interesting thing of sort of like all of high school's building up to this one thing where we're going to talk about what happens next after high school, which is essentially like all of you are going to find husbands, you're going to build frum homes where this is what your observance looks like. This every month you go to the mikvah, this is what we know about covering your hair in the marketplace versus at home, right? There's a lot to learn there, and it is, by the way, fascinating. I think it's more fascinating now to me than it was when I was
Well,
17.
what was it like then when you were
But well,
7?
I just remember not being fully out to myself, though, looking back, I I I knew, but I
Mhm.
wasn't like consciously fully out to myself. I remember that I always knew in that class there was this like underlying thought throughout that all these things are not going to apply to me. Like
Mhm.
everyone else in this room is like real, they're like, they're talking about these things they're going to do and they're building their futures towards this. And this is what it's all for. And I remember just being like, I'm learning this and it's interesting. And I'm sure I did well on the tests, but I like it just, this is not going to be reality for me
Mhm.
in the same way that we're talking about, which is sort of one of the things that leads to not being able to envision a future. Like this was what I was taught is like the future and the gold standard.
Mhm.
And it just always felt like, I don't know,
Mhm.
it doesn't sit with me. Not, it's not that I'm not going to do it because I don't want to. Like actually all I want is like all of this, the stuff that I'm learning, the halacha, the Torah, all of that. But the fact that yeah, the fact that I just kind of knew
Mhm.
it's just not going to apply in the same way.
Yeah, I think going back to something that we mentioned earlier, which is when you don't, um, well, actually, I don't know that we really touched on it earlier, which is
Let's do it now.
when you're feeling, yes, when you're feeling rejected from your community, regardless of whether, and if you're kind of not part of the LGBTQ community and you think you're not rejecting anyone, great. That's wonderful to hear. But if you're feeling rejected and you're queer youth, it's kind of like a, well, why should I? And it's like, why should I beyond kind of what do I connect with? It's this community doesn't like me. Um, I don't fit in. Why should I even put in effort? It's so hard to connect. Why am I supposed to come up with things? Not to mention things may be a little different now than a few years ago. Um, but the LGBTQ community can be quite accepting of your LGBTQ-ness. That part hasn't changed. Um, but if you're so like the Orthodox community, traditional communities, you've got good competition. Like you have a lot of competition when it comes to like accepting queer youth. Um,
Yeah, I think that this a lot actually, where we don't really get this question in the same way anymore, but there is this question of like, well, what do you do about youth who are on the fence, right? There's like this somehow imaginary fence that all these youth are sitting on somehow. And if we say one thing, and the fence, in the way that I understand it, and the questions that were asked, was either you are going to be queer or you're not going to be queer. And
uh,
there's like well, someone is like on the fence. We don't want to push them in one direction or another. And I think a few things. First of all, no one's going to be queer or not queer because you were nice to them or mean to them. That's number one. But also, I think we're thinking about the wrong fence. I think the fence is whether people stay part of the Orthodox community or not. Like the choice that one has is I'm going to be part of this community. I'm going to like this is going to be my home, or I'm going to leave this community. And that's really the fence. And the question then is like, how do we make sure if we want them to stay on our side of the fence, how do we make sure that we are actually working to do that?
it's so funny. I had not thought when you first brought it up that the question was whether you're going to be queer or not. I interpreted it the second way. And
What's
that's
the second way? Oh, the
which
Orthodox.
was the yeah.
Oh, that's
What if they're
fascinating.
whether they're are they going to stay work? Because to me, it's like that's the obvious question.
Well, so
Like, how do we get them
maybe
to
the
hold on for dear life? Because they're
right.
holding on for dear life.
Right.
So,
I think it's maybe I hope that that's the question we're asking now, because I think that is the more accurate question and the question that we actually have like ownership over. Like we
mhm.
actually can do something about it. We can't make people LGBTQ plus or not LGBTQ plus. It just is. I mean, scientifically, it has not been proven to work.
That's for
Um,
sure.
but we do know that people can be Orthodox or not Orthodox, or observant or from or not observant.
Hmm.
Um, and
Right. The question is like, do you make it extremely difficult and unpleasant? I had a when I taught in Hebrew school for like a year. That's how long I lasted. Um, boy, that was challenging. Um, um, the teacher, the principal, said, "I'm in the business of selling positive Jewish experiences." That line has stuck with me.
That's nice.
It's like, are we trying to like have people stay? Like, if that's what we're doing, like you got to keep that
Yeah,
mindset.
to me, I love that. That to me is what camp was for me growing up. And I wonder, I think that's another interesting question in this that we could have a whole different episode about. But for me, I always thought of like school was teaching me the things I can do and can't do, like all of the things that you have to learn that you're not allowed to do. And that camp was like living Judaism in a joyful way, which is I was a 10 for 2, 10 months out of the year, living 10 months out of the year for 2 months every year. I counted down for to get to camp.
Some people count down 6 days of the week to get to Shabbos.
Indeed.
I just felt like saying that.
Living 6 for 1.
Yeah, 6 for 1.
Great.
Sounds like a sale at the dollar store.
Excellent.
All right.
Well,
and back to queer Jewish youth
programming. I think that let's talk about some
I want to shift to
things.
what are we actually doing to help kids integrate these things? Like the question was, if they're on the fence, how do they, like, what do we do for
On
them?
the Orthodox
And I'm
or
like,
the halachic or non-halachic or observant,
right,
non-observant fed.
right.
I think, I mean, one thing I think we can do, and I think this has started happening more and more, is, well, there's a bunch of things. I want to talk about Sudat Simcha that we have, but
Right.
for 1 second.
Okay.
I think we need to be shifting the questions we're asking to not how can queer people live a halachic lifestyle because we're talking about the pasuk, but like who's making kiddush on Shabbos? What happens if you have 2 moms and they make kiddush and havdalah, etc., and then you have guests over and there is a person who is assigned male at birth in the like how do those kinds of things work? There just are so many other questions about living Jewish life, and I'm thinking mostly like positive Jewish life, because I do think that that's what I think that's a huge part of Orthodoxy and religion. Though I also have been through my fair share of tochacha and mussar, like rebuke and how do you fire and brimstone, right?
Yeah.
Throughout my education. But I think like, yeah, how are we making it positive?
So for me, I always love to talk about this. First of all, JQI exists. Now, what do I mean by that? I always tell people when they ask, like, are we from? I give whatever. That's another conversation. I always say, like, we embody queerness and like from culture, and we don't compromise on either. We have bags that say, what is it? Work slave schlep. No, schlep with pride. Schlep with pride.
Yes, there we go.
And then we have work slake fetch onesies and JQI yarmulkes. And whoa, a cup of water. Oy vey, so gay. Like we try to keep it as a culturally, like we're just not going to let go of either of them. And these are like the positive things. So I think like the vibe here is like, of course you can do both. Not only can you do both, we're going to make it amazing that you can do both.
I have to bring up Elu V'Elu here because this is our core philosophy at JQI, and it's really it really is the key to almost everything we do. Elu V'Elu means both these and those, and it's essentially the Jewish yes and the idea that you can have multiple truths that seem like they're contradictory and they're still both true at the same time, or all true at the same time. And I think that's really interesting, especially when it comes to like, we are not going to compromise on our Jewishness. We're not going to compromise on our queerness. Sometimes that means that in the room, there are people for whom us listening to Miami Boys Choir is going to be like the most affirming space where they get to listen to this like very specific kind of music in a queer setting. And sometimes that music is going to be reminding people in the space of something that was really difficult for them or really traumatic for them. And how can we, we are holding all these different things, which I think is relevant to all of this entire conversation, that there are certain things where, this has been used against queer people for so long, or this has been, this thing doesn't make me feel great. So anything we talk about now is definitely going to be, it's very individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what makes me feel connected and like I can be both my Jewish and queer self and envision that future. For me, it's like I picture Shabbos, like Shabbos table, Shabbos. I always, that to me is like what it's all about. For some people, Shabbos is maybe a thing they do that is not, maybe they're not living 6 days a week for one day a week. Not saying that I necessarily do that. I have a lot of days of the week. But that all, different days. But
During Tishrei, you're only doing like 3 days of the week for 4 days of Yom Tov or
indeed.
whatever it is. Sorry,
No,
I'm really on this religious tear tonight.
it's definitely an important
I'm
point.
trying to envision my Jewish future the next time the high holidays come up.
Yeah. I'm thinking like, meanwhile, there are some people that I know who are like lesbian couples for whom covering their hair is really affirming
Oh
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
really like, this is what's going to make them feel their like Jewishness and queerness at one time. And then there are people for whom that's like, I want nothing to do with covering my hair, right? Like that's what I learned about in Widgel that was like, I always had this feeling of like, this isn't going to work for me. And it's just interesting, the different things that work for different people.
Yeah, I had two thoughts. I think both of them I forgot. Figured it was my turn to forget what I was going to say after.
It wouldn't be us talking
But I do think
if
that
we
the
didn't.
mindset of like, how do we help people figure out how to, it's like you got to lean into it. Like it's got to be like, of course you can do both. And like, yeah, if you're my kid, if you're my student, like I'm going to be so happy to like help you make this work and to figure it out. It's got to be like all in.
Right. So that goes to our Sudat Simchas that we do
Mm.
here. So we started this new initiative maybe 2 years ago now, where we realized that so many of our youth were not able to envision a future for themselves. And at the same time, we also know a lot of, we're getting to a point where we have a lot of JQI alumni and people who have queer simchas and like, happy life cycle milestones and events going on. And how can we sort of match these two things? Or can we show the youth that can't envision this future one potential version of what their future could look like? And so we started this initiative called Share Your Simcha, and it's basically exactly what it sounds like. You're not gonna be able to invite, let's say, to a wedding or to a simchat bat, like all JQIers, and that's, there's a lot of problems with that.
Hmm.
But we can host something here that feels like that is recognizing the simcha, that is inviting JQIers in to be part of it. And so there's two things going on. One is like the actual simcha, the event itself, and then the other thing is allowing youth to see that, because sometimes that's also a problem where there's kind of like, hey, you can have this for yourself, but don't be too loud about it.
Mm.
And actually being loud about it in whatever ways that means could be saving a life for somebody who was not able to envision, who all they could see was darkness when they looked into the future. And now because you shared this simcha with the world, because you were loud, quote unquote, about it, now they can see that there is some kind of hope for them.
It might be saving a life in the literal sense. It could also be, not to get too spiritual here, it could also be like saving a Jewish soul in a way. It's like, oh,
Very
I can
from
I can be part of this. Like, oh, if those people can do it, I can do it.
right.
Just want to say we get to some pretty interesting, we've had Sheva Brachos. Okay. We've had I'm not downplaying Sheva Brachos like Mazel Tov.
Whatever,
But,
move on to
but
Rachael
but I think one of the coolest things for me was we had an upshearing.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully it was just to celebrate. We didn't actually cut hair. And that's one of my things. I don't know, cutting hair when you're going to serve food. It's like a little, ugh. But the point is that we did an upshearing.
What about if you're
Really
gonna
cool.
lick honey off of an alphabet?
Ay,
Kidding.
ay.
I mean, not kidding, but
Okay, so we did that. We also had a Pidyon Ben for a lesbian couple for their second child
yeah.
because it was that the mother carrying the child. It was her firstborn.
Yeah, I love that. That one. I don't think that anyone was as excited as we were for that. Like this
Coolest thing.
queer simcha that really only happens for queer couples, for a specific type in very specific circumstances. We've had a bar mitzvah. We had a simchat bat. We were working on a siyum, but we haven't gotten that.
Right.
That we're still working on it.
Right. Maybe we need to start a JQI Colel. Okay, maybe not. No new things. We're trying to hammer down our current projects. Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna hold off on the Colel.
But I think let's turn to some questions from the audience.
Yes, but I wanted to say one other thing, which was I think
for your questions.
it's okay. We're not ready yet for the questions. Which is I think an important, critical thing here is not only do you have to be all in, you have to be flexible. If everything's gonna be trying to get queer youth to just squeeze into like the way you want them to be and the way they should be practicing according to everybody else, that's kind of why we're here in the first place. So there has to be some flexibility. Like we're talking about a Pidyon Ben for a lesbian couple, and it's so cool. Like there was actually like teaching. It was educational. The person, they were like all in the couple. It was
a baby on a silver platter.
Oh my! It was like so from and so cool. And kind of like using that almost as an example of like there has to be flexibility here to make it work for them.
Right. And you can be there. I think that's really important. I think when we talk about like, how do we help people stay from or be, and by the way, that it's worth mentioning that it's not the only way to have a Jewish queer future is by remaining, or like there are so many different ways. And there are, we're living in a time where, especially in New York, but in the world, there's like different types of Jewish observance and ways to be even halachic that are not necessarily considered Orthodox. So we should, but I think being flexible about also what the definition of from and what the definition of like living a Jewish life and Jewish future is, because when I was kind of taught in school that it's either orthodoxy or nothing. Right. Like if you're going to be another denomination, it's all fake anyway. So it's like, it's not real. And I've had to like really work on, unlearning that, because I've also met so many different types of Jewish people who have so many different ways of practicing their Judaism. And I think a lot of times people come to JQI feeling like either I have to be Orthodox or it's nothing. And I think that that's also a really important thing. Like some Judaism and some Jewish life can still, even if, that's better than I think in this conversation, in my opinion, than like feeling like you have to throw it all away.
Totally. This is, to me, like we labeled this specifically. The topic of this was like a Jewish future. We didn't want to say it was Orthodox. The hope is that, and I also had a similar experience. Like later in life, I'm like, oh, there are other ways of like engaging seriously, like very seriously, very committed to Judaism in a way that like I was, I can be Orthodox my whole life and be like,
right,
whatever,
people who
whatever,
do things like because it's routine,
right,
and not necessarily with like their whole heart in it. I think that's really,
you can be super seriously engaged in a way that's Orthodox-ish, or I don't even know that we should get into like what's Orthodox, what's not.
No, definitely
but you
not.
can be super seriously engaged Jewishly.
But I think the point is that like what is considered religious to you needs to be flexible, because this conversation cannot be had if your question is actually how can they envision a life in my version of Judaism? Because that, I mean, I do believe that in general doesn't work for many people, not just for, queer youth. So that's
Very well
another
said.
a separate conversation. I will not claim to be the expert in that one. But let's move.
Let's go on to some
Let's ask some
questions.
questions.
All right, so these are the ones that were submitted in advance.
And Shepherd, you'll tell us ones that are submitted.
And this was a we're not going to get to all of them, but this is a good plug for submitting questions in advance. That's why it was registration. That's part of the advantage of coming on live is you get priority for questions. Okay, question 1. How can I best encourage my introverted, non-binary child to try out some Jewish events like NCSY in a way that doesn't make them feel uncomfortable or seem too pushy?
I love this question. We do get this question in different forms. Sometimes we get parents who say like, how do I get my kids to come to JQY? And the answer really is like, you actually can't. Like, if your kid doesn't want to come, it's not going to go super well for you to force them to come here. And I think that there's something. I think what we can do is like teach the positive things, benefits and the good parts that really bring simcha and joy, and hope that our kids want to also experience that. But we really can't force people to do things, or we can, but it doesn't usually go over super well.
Right. And I think the person asking this question was really not wanting to force, doesn't want to make them feel uncomfortable or seem too pushy. I go back to, I mean, I know this person just said like NCSY. I would be very curious, using a neutral word, very curious about
positive word, even
a positive word, about whether NCSY or any particular brand or institution is going to provide the right experience that's going to help them envision a future for themselves as queer Jewish youth. So to me, like, that's the first question to ask is like, is this going to do the flexibility and the creative stuff that we've been talking about, which by the way is challenging. We do this all day, every day.
We don't claim to have answers to everything, by the way.
Right. Right. So like, this is not easy. And if an organization is generally catered to the general Orthodox population, like, this is going to be an area that would benefit from a JQY training to help them. And also, I just think it's important to think about what's setting up the young person for success in terms of this goal. And that's the first thing to look at.
I think I mean, I love this question of like, in general, engaging in Jewish life as an introvert. I am a proud introvert, and it's a good question about like, how can I, be involved in this like very communal life. And also, like, sometimes I just want to stay home. Like, sometimes I just want to be alone, and I want to not be at shul or at kiddush, or I think it's an interesting question, separate from the queer and religious conversation.
Totally. One way to engage, we do at JQI have a queer Jewish book club where you can get, I think we send over boy, when you'd think we weren't working with the lights going off in the middle. So the Queer Jewish Book Club, I didn't know. We've been doing it for like 2 years, something like that. I did not know. And we send out a Jewish queer book once a month. I had no idea that there were that many Jewish queer books.
Endless. We have not run out yet.
And we haven't run out.
I'm not even worried about running out.
And we send out over 80 of them per month now, to over 20 something states. So
that's a good example, though. I think what we're talking about is representation, right? So you can be part of a community or feel it's kind of collective self-esteem, right? Feel like you're part of this group and be proud of being part of this group without even ever having had stepped foot into that community. It's kind of like, this is my example. I feel really proud that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a Jewish person, I feel really embarrassed that Madoff was a Jewish person,
Mm.
right? And that like collective self-esteem is like I don't know them. I was never in a room with them. But it's not true actually. I heard Ruth Bader Ginsburg speak one time. But I don't personally know them, but I feel this like camaraderie or this like, you know, my own sense of self or part of my identity is tied to other people. And I think that that is being able to read about other people like you or not like you in books and in media, like different in movies, is a different way to engage with the community. I think that's also why we invest so much in our like in our social media accounts where we provide like exclusive Jewish queer content, is because we are basically saying like these things that you're experiencing are sometimes like these are actually universal things. Like you're part of a community that is experiencing this thing. Not, you know, it's never going to be everybody experiencing this thing, but like Yom Kippur is particularly hard for this group of people, and it's not just you, right? That's really what we're providing. And I think it really works well with introverts being able to be part of the community, and you don't really have to go anywhere in order to do that.
All right.
Next
Um,
question.
all right, we're gonna move on to the next question. Um, I have received rejection from most important people in my life, and me being not religious, I don't like the labels that come with that. I want to learn from queer leaders how we can be a part of the community, and if we don't want to, how do we avoid rejection? So, question, how can the queer person give, quote, clarity to the, quote, religious people who reject the idea of being queer?
There's so many questions. There's so many layers to that.
Mm.
I think one thing that stands out to me is that we really don't get to control the circumstances around us. And that's just like that's just reality. I think we can't say like we're going to um avoid rejection, right? Like that sort of just turns into avoidance in general and not actually avoiding rejection, because you don't actually get to control how other people respond to you or act towards you. And I know there's this phrase, it gets better, that it gets better for queer people. And while I love that phrase, I also think there are times where it quote unquote actually doesn't get better. It's you that gets better, right? Like you get stronger, you build your own community and your own coping mechanisms and skills, and you're able to handle it differently in such a way that either something that felt like rejection to you at some point no longer feels like rejection, or where you have your own boundaries and you know you've decided that you don't want that in your life anymore, and you've had the autonomy to choose that. So I think that's
Yeah.
one
My
thing
thought
there.
is that is similar to yours. If your goal to kind of feeling connected to Judaism, or even if your goal is something else, if the way you're gonna achieve that is through clarifying to others that you can be queer and Jewish, uh, your goal can't be to, you can't rely on convincing others of something for your own personal, um, mental health. If you're a leader of a social movement, sure, that's what's involved in being a leader. But as far as like providing clarity, that queer people can be queer and Jewish, I think it's about whether you think you can be queer and Jewish. And I think, by the way, this is super hard, but like it's almost like showing rather than telling. It's like I'm showing up, I'm doing Jewish things, I'm involved in the community. I remember a gay guy who I knew, he's not alive anymore. He said he was involved in an Orthodox synagogue, and he said, so much of this is what you make of it. I am part of the membership committee. I do the security outside the door. It's like I'm showing up and doing things. So like So I think there's the aspect of like I don't
Like
need
you can't
I don't need
reject me.
yeah,
Like
you can't reject me.
yeah. There is also
I
this
don't need to
idea,
explain anything. I just need
right?
to show up.
There's this idea that I've definitely experienced and know many other people do. I call it projected rejection, where like
Mm.
I am assume everywhere I go, I am assuming that this place, if they knew who I was, that I would be rejected here. And as a queer, I mean, I think that that's totally a fair assumption. Give it like there are there when you have historically been rejected by a certain place over and over again or by a certain community, it's not absurd to feel like you would be rejected if you went to this space. And so I'm calling it projected rejection, but I'm
I
also
mean anticipated rejection.
anticipated. Yeah, I think in some ways those are almost the same
Mm.
thing, where I'm projecting or I'm anticipating that you're going to do this thing. I'm trying to predict your behavior and your feelings and thoughts. And I actually heard this from a JQIer, and I love
Mhm.
this, who said that they decided that they were going to live their life not ducking before they get punched. And this idea of like they realized that they were living in a way that they were assuming that everywhere they went, people were going to punch them. And so they would duck first.
Mm.
And that they have been working on this I'm going to live my life as if I'm not going to get punched in the face. And I'm not going to be the one who ducks before someone throws a punch. And sometimes that might mean that I get punched in the face, but at least I'm not living my life assuming I'm going to be punched in the face. And I think it's a really, I love the example because I think like imagine walking around New York City like everyone here is going to punch me in the face. And depending on whether you're in Times Square or not, that might be real. I'm kidding. We come to Times Square every day, and I
Yes.
always love the things that we see on the way to work. But I think that it's that is the feeling of like walking into an Orthodox shul sometimes for me, or like I'm going to visit my wife's yeshivish family, and my feeling is like I do feel like I'm gonna be punched in the face at every corner, and so I have to work really hard. And this is like extremely difficult to do. And I even wear like physical reminders to myself to say like you can be proud, you don't have to duck, essentially, because ducking all the time is exhausting and it's not a way
Hmm.
to live a life of joy and fulfillment. um
Yeah, I think that if you're an adult in a queer person's life, whether you're a therapist or a teacher or a rabbi, it's like you need to be empowering them with this, like, don't duck. Like you have to believe that they can do
there's
this.
two sides of this
Like
also,
this
though.
is
One is like let's teach our youth not to duck, and then the other is let's teach the community to stop punching,
yeah.
because that is we only need to be teaching our queer people about the resilience and the ability, teaching them how to walk around in the world proudly because of the punches that have been thrown at them personally and
Hmm.
historically. And so I do think that I just want to be really clear that that the onus is not on the queer youth only. I think this is a coping mechanism as a response to something that the community needs to change and should be doing better.
Yeah, I also want to say something about the projected rejection or anticipated rejection, which I think sometimes rejection sounds like a really strong thing. But if we think about all the subtle ways,
It's micro rejection.
oh God, I mean, I can just give one example from my personal life. Somebody, as soon as they met me, said, um, are you looking to get set up? And I was already like it was Shavuos night. It was after like a late night kiddush. I don't know why this has anything to do with it, but I just said, sure, if you want to set me up with a guy. And the person was like, thank you so much for telling me. Because some people just keep trying to avoid me. And I'm like, this isn't really about you and you having to chase. But it was like really pretty uncomfortable. Not that I had to say it, but kind of the response was not, it was like very focused on him and him having to chase people. And it was like, was I rejected? No, in a way. The person said, like, thank you. But having to deal with it, this is not like this stuff happens all the time. Even if it's not kicking somebody out of shul. Um, this stuff, it happens all the time, and it's pretty unpleasant.
We have we are running very low on time.
Okay, running low on time.
Do we have time, I think, for one question?
Do we have one live question?
Someone is all right. We got a taker for a Daf Yomi Museum in a year and a half.
That
We
sounds
accept.
pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can like, can they submit it after? Oh yeah, of course submit it.
Yeah, if
Q&A
so, if
box.
you're raising your hand on the webinar, you need to submit the actual question into the chat box, or we're not going to be able to. We can't call on you in this setup that we have right now, but we can if you ask quickly because
Yeah.
we are low on time, or maybe we can get to this another time.
Yes.
We can get to that. There was one other.
There are two others. Um, let's go with I struggle to help Jewish queer college age and adult clients feel like they can truly find belonging. I think this got cut off. They can truly find belonging when they want to stay in the Orthodox community and stay committed to halachic lifestyle.
I think we kind of touched on this a little bit with like I have a lot of questions back to that person, like what kind of halachic lifestyle, because I think there's a lot of different meanings that could have. I also think, like, is this your version of frum that you're talking about, or is it what does frum mean for this person? Where do they live? There, how can we teach people to build their own communities if the one that they want doesn't exist? And also to be like actually doing outreach and finding your people, rather than almost this like communal projected rejection where like actually there's a lot of different options for people, a lot of different communities, and that are options. And I think sometimes just because you're told that there's no space for you here, it doesn't mean that that's actually true. Sometimes it means you have to ask a different person.
Yes. I was gonna say, right, for many queer people, and halachic lifestyle is code word for abstinence.
Or celibacy.
Let's just
Yeah.
celibacy, right? Celibacy, abstinence.
Maybe.
Because it goes counter to like the homosexual or gay lifestyle. I think that's where like the juxtaposition is. So just keeping in mind, like depending on what you mean by halachic
Right.
lifestyle, some people
We've
mean
touched on a
that.
lot of
Yeah.
these topics
Yeah, yeah,
already.
yeah.
Um, so my answer is rewind and listen again
Sounds
for
good.
that question.
Many parents are a black and white, either from or not. How do we help them uh, get into the process of Elu ve'elu and empowering youth to be engaged?
That is, yeah. I mean, that, that's, it's kind of like, how do we teach, in my opinion, how do we teach parents
Mm-hmm.
to parent their children, to have their own autonomy and find their own confidence in who they are? I don't have answers to how
Yeah,
I think I still think this is one of those things where it's like we don't get to control our circumstances.
right.
I know so many people whose families have really come around because they just live their life. And I think that's like even in cases where someone has said like this will never be true, right? Like I am this person is super homophobic and or super transphobic, and there's never going to be a time. And to me, this is what love wins means actually to me, which is like somebody can be resistant as much as they want. And I do think that at the end of the day, when you love someone, that wins. And I also think that you can't live your life waiting for other circumstances um
Mm.
to be the way that you want them to be. And so sometimes unfortunately that means um making boundaries with your own parents,
Mm.
and saying like, this is what I'm choosing. And of course, this only can work if you're in a place where this is like actually safe for you to do so, because people, if you need to have a roof over your head, and if sometimes you might have to live with your parents' rules,
Mm.
until you're able to have your own place to live, and then you can make more boundaries than there were before. But there always are ways to make boundaries, for yourself,
Yeah.
in your situation.
One of my I have a few thoughts on this because I think the question is coming from like almost like if you work with parents, how do you help them get beyond the binary, not the gender binary, the halachic or not halachic binary. I think parents need a few things. One thing that comes to mind is permission. Like, are you allowed to be flexible? Like, am I allowed to be black, um, medium gray,
So these
and white?
non-rabbis over here say yes.
Was right. Okay.
But
So I say
that's
yes.
it's not our,
But
yeah.
but I do think having if like rabbinic guidance is important to a parent, connecting them with the rabbi who will want to do that. I think meeting other parents who have done it, who are similar, um, will help them as well. I
Yeah.
guess we'll keep it to two things. One is meeting other parents who have either had some success, nobody's ever like succeeded and done, but having success, and also having like the appropriate spiritual guidance that will help somebody work toward that goal.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning there are two organizations that work specifically with parents, because we really at JQI focus much more on supporting youth, which is why I answered the way that I did in the form of how we can, be teaching and supporting youth. But two organizations, one is Eshel and one is called Kesher Families, and they both have different approaches to how they work with parents. But it is worth checking out, and because parents do need support also, and they should be able to find support in others and not from their queer children.
Excellent.
One more.
Oh,
Minute
okay.
left. Okay, great.
So we're just about out of time. So just going to talk about next month's. So next month's episode of Holding Complexity is the pros and cons of LGBTQ labels. I will be here. My colleague, JQI social worker and trans lead Tali Benko will be here. We'll be talking about LGBTQ language, how it has evolved, to what degree it's helpful or unhelpful. I am super excited about this. We're going to be having this on Monday, April 13th, 2026. Obviously, it's in a month, so we're still in 2026. Sorry, just a little my mind is just talking. 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Hopefully you already changed your clocks. So you know what time that is. Registration is live. Registration is live. So jqi.org/training. Don't wait on this. You can totally be impulsive. Just go to jqi.org/training now, register. Um, and this program and all of our services to youth are provided free of charge. We can only do that by the generous support of folks like you and others. So you can go to jqi.org/donate, make a tax deductible gift, and it will go to helping youth and providing education to folks so that youth can embrace all of themselves, have whole mental health, and connect to Judaism.
We're also, I mean, while we're talking about donating, we have an upcoming gala. So for anyone listening right now, jqi.org/gala has all the information. But that is coming up on Monday, March 16th.
Just happens to be that another pronunciation of the word gala is
Gala.
yeah. I actually thought of this when I was
Gala, if you want.
some people say gala. Isn't that like pacha? Isn't that also called gala? Oh, there we go. Jellied calf's
Everything comes
feet.
back to Jewish food.
Yeah, and jelly's calf's feet. Okay, and if we wanted to end on a better note than pacha, sorry, it's not tonight. We're gonna end on pacha. All right, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you and good night.
Yes, see you soon.
And the lights go out. Are we still live?